Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another edition of Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. Volodymyr Zelensky is making his 5th visit to the White House, perhaps the most important one that will decide on lasting peace guarantees for Ukraine. At the very beginning of the meeting, President Donald Trump, in the Oval Office, in the presence of Ukrainian president, said, "We have a very fair deal. It's a big commitment for the United States." However, we do pre-record this show, and as I speak, they are having a very fiery press conference. And of course, the sparks are flying, and the outcome of today is yet to be seen. Let's start now with an overview of the highlights from Ukraine now from the last week.
On February 26, Ukraine targeted Russian military and industrial sites in occupied Crimea and Krasnodar Krai. The operation, executed by Ukraine's unmanned system forces and military intelligence, aimed to disrupt Russia's air operations and logistical capabilities. The Saki and Kacha airfields, which are crucial for Russian air control over the Black Sea and for launching strikes on Ukrainian territory, were hit in the attack. Another target was the Tuapse oil refinery, a facility with an annual processing capacity of 12 million tons. Local residents have reported at least 40 explosions near the site via social media, with significant damage to infrastructure. On February 26, the Russian Defense Ministry said Russian forces intercepted and downed 128 Ukrainian drones taking part in an overnight attack. The Russian Air Forces claimed it downed 83 drones over Krasnodar Krai, 30 drones over Crimea, and intercepted additional drones in the Azov and Black Sea regions. Russia also reported shooting down one drone in Bryansk and another in the Kursk region. On February 24th, Ukraine targeted an oil refinery in Russia's Ryazan region. This marks the third drone attack on the Ryazan oil refinery since the start of 2025. The attack resulted in at least 5 explosions near the refinery. Preliminary reports from Ukraine's general staff indicate that the strike caused a fire, though the full extent of the damage is still being assessed.
Also throughout the week, Russia launched hundreds of drones on Ukraine, despite Ukraine's best efforts. Many hit Ukrainian cities, killing and injuring dozens.
Ukrenegro, Ukraine's state-owned power grid operator, has introduced emergency power cuts in some regions of Ukraine. This is due to overnight Russian strikes targeting energy facilities. According to the largest Ukrainian private power company, emergency power outages were in effect in the Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk regions. In addition to attacks on energy facilities across Ukraine, Russian forces also struck the Sami region, damaging an apartment block and 10 houses. The Ukrainian military announced on Friday it had shot down 107 drones out of the 208 launched by Russia overnight. This was just one day, but throughout the week, Russia launched over 1,000 drones hitting dozens of cities across Ukraine.
In Pokrovsk, a city in the Donetsk region, well, it's been the major hotspot on the Ukrainian front line for months now, with Russia slowly but steadily gaining ground. The pressure from Moscow's troops has recently decreased, however, with Ukraine launching successful counterattacks.
Ukrainian forces launched limited but successful counterattacks across the eastern front, reclaiming a village of Kotline. A video released by Ukraine's Airborne Forces Command showed the 25th Separate Airborne Brigade's successful attack on the village, located near the strategic city of Pokrovsk. The 25th Brigade, a long-standing unit of the armed forces of Ukraine with a battle history dating back to 2014, is the country's only major formation organized for airborne assaults. Since February 2022, it had predominantly operated in the region of Pokrovsk. The embattled town of Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region is among the most hotly contested areas on the front. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrskyi previously claimed that 7,000 Russian soldiers were killed near Pokrovsk in January alone.
A war of words may finally translate into cooperation. President Zelensky traveled to Washington on Friday to put the final touches on the minerals agreement between Ukraine and the United States.
The meeting of President Zelensky and Donald Trump has turned into a shouting match, with the US President accusing Zelensky of gambling with millions of lives and suggesting his actions could trigger World War III.
I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States, and your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. but you don't have the cards.
During the brawl, Zelensky urged skepticism about Russia's commitment to diplomacy.
He broken this ceasefire. He killed our people, and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
In the end, the press conference was cancelled, and Zelensky was asked to leave Washington without signing a critical minerals deals with the US that Trump had demanded and suggested was a condition for future support for Ukraine.
Did you sign the deal? He's on the phone.
At the Kyiv Defense Tech Innovations Forum last week, we got to see some of the very interesting semi-autonomous systems, such as this one. Check it out.
So we are producing AI-powered turrets. We are using calibers 20.4 and 7.62. Our turrets can detect the target and calculate a ballistic, and the operator should make a decision. Should we shoot or not?
Tell me, how has it been to finance this project?
This project is self-funded with me and my partners. It was a way to Ukraine win in this war.
How many of these turrets have you produced?
We produced till now near 100 turrets, and they all are delivered to Ukraine military forces, and they effectively do it works.
What would you need to get 1,000 turrets to the armed forces of Ukraine?
All we need is that our government should say, guys, do it. Here is the money, here is the contracts, and we can do 1,000 turrets in 1 year without any problem.
The government is supposed to really up the amount of funding this year. Last year they say about 40 million, this year is supposed to be 100 million. Do you think you'll be able to find more money for your project?
Yes, we have requests from Ukraine government for billions of hryvnias contracts, so we have a good opportunity to say our words in this war.
Do you think these systems would be of interest to other European countries?
No, but it will be interesting for a little bit poor countries.
We have had a whirlwind of information coming out of Washington. Of course, a bit of mudslinging between the two capitals of Washington, D.C. and Kyiv over the last several days. So now joining us here to break it all down and filter out the noise is John Sweet, retired U.S. military intelligence officer. Hello, John. Thanks again for joining us on Ukraine This Week.
Hey, Don. Thanks for bringing me back to the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, now, I just got back from Kyiv. It was really difficult over there to discern which direction we were headed. Of course, this whole thing kicked off with negotiations over the head of the Ukrainians. So it was about Ukraine without Ukraine. President Trump calling Zelensky a dictator, and several other let's say, unflavorful gestures from Washington, including reiterating all the Russian talking points. But today, here we said Zelensky's in Washington meeting with President Trump before Trump ever, he's not meeting with President Vladimir Putin right now, so I am a bit optimistic. Now, going into this meeting today, here on Friday, what do you think we're going to see in just a few hours' time coming out of that meeting with Donald Trump? Do you think we're going to get a deal? And do you think that this deal will at least give the United States at least some skin in the game so that perhaps if there's not explicit security guarantees, well, at least there's a pretty serious economic interest for the United States in Ukraine?
Yeah, Don, it's the last week's kind of been like Puerto Rican weather. If you don't like the current weather, just wait 15 minutes and it will change. And that kind of feels as though the way the negotiations have played out, both behind the scenes but also within the media. Look, I think the RAM deal is a step forward, but let's understand the RAM deal doesn't bring closure to the war. It doesn't It doesn't stop the war. It certainly does provide security guarantees. What it does, in my mind, okay, is it messages to Putin that the U.S. has an investment in Ukraine, and that you probably shouldn't go further into the Donbass to interfere with that investment. But I think it's a step in the right direction. I think the president needs to understand that just by having U.S. interests there in raw materials, okay, the minerals that are underneath the ground, he still has to defend those raw materials. He still has to secure those raw materials. And then, as his Secretary of Defense has said, no U.S. troops. So who's going to do it? I mean, is NATO going to do it? European forces going to do it? Is he going to hire contractors to do it? No, by the way, where are we drawing the line between Russia and Ukraine? So it's a step. It's the first step, but it certainly doesn't bring the war to a conclusion. It just brings people a little closer together.
No, it doesn't. But where we were just a few days ago, it's really nice to see the Ukrainian flag flying alongside the American flag outside the White House. You mentioned the security guarantees, what it's going to look like. Of course, I think very instrumental this week was President Macron and Prime Minister Keir Starmer going there to Washington, and it seems like they may have influenced Trump, at least in his talking points as of yet. He just questioned whether indeed he did call President Zelensky a dictator. But the one thing here is that Keir Starmer was pretty adamant about the fact that there needed to be a U.S. backstop if there are any peacekeepers, whether that be from France or from the UK, deployed. Do you think he'll be successful with that? And is there some kind of guarantee that the United States could give, this backstop, if you will, that doesn't necessarily fall under NATO or under Article 5?
Great question. Look, I think both Macron and the UK Prime Minister have done a great job at chipping away at the armor of Putin. Not Putin, excuse me, but rather President Trump. Look, I think the more Trump is exposed to different ideas outside of his administration and different thoughts, I think he gets a little closer to understanding what the real problem is. And the problem, again, is Russia. And look, just listen to the comments from Lavrov within the past couple of days in which he doubled back down on no ceasefires, no European forces, and a dismantlement of the Ukrainian military. Now, non-starters for Ukraine should be non-starters for Trump. But again, it really does come down to exactly what you said. I don't think we're going to see NATO forces. I don't think we're going to see European forces at a bilateral level. But we're going to have to see some sort of security and economic security from the perspective of, they won't attack because the U.S. has a U.S. investment there. I think that's fool's gold. And there's going to have to be some sort of backstop, as you said. And it really comes down to, what is that backstop? Now, is that backstop additional capabilities in the forms of weaponry, precision deep strike capabilities, airstrikes? It remains to be seen. But again, this is just the front end of the negotiation process. And again, he being Trump's going to meet with Putin supposedly within the next weeks or so in Saudi Arabia. So more to be determined as far as what concessions, if any, Russia is willing to make. Right now, Russia's only made two concessions. One concession is that Zelensky can sit at the table, but he can't sign any papers because he's not the legitimate president. And the other concession, surprisingly enough, was that the Ukraine could join the European Union.
Right, and I think we're going to see, I think we've already seen with the European Commission visiting on the anniversary of the war this week on Monday, some very, very positive statements coming out of there, and potentially, we look at this region of the world, and many countries have joined NATO before they've joined the European Union. That typically tends to be the path, but it seems that for Ukraine, it may look a little bit different. I'd like to ask you, as a retired U.S. military intelligence officer, how much has the United States benefited off its partnership with Ukraine? And this includes Donald Trump's first term in office. And we can't lose sight of the fact that Donald Trump did give the first lethal weapons package to Ukraine. And so I'm wondering, we're sitting here all those years later, entering our fourth year in the full-scale invasion. how much has the United States benefited from its partnership with Ukraine in terms of intelligence and knowing what's going on there in Russia?
Well, certainly. And let me begin first with the support that Ukraine's provided to the United States, particularly in Afghanistan, supporting that operation is, in Afghanistan, supporting the United States as a NATO, partnership for peace contributing country, as has Georgia as well. So they have provided skin in the game for the United States. Look, in return, Ukraine provides unique insights, if you will, into Russians' thoughts and Russian culture and the way in which they act. Many Ukrainian military officers, particularly the senior officers, have been trained by Russian military academies, have trained alongside Russia. So it gives us a very good understanding of the Russian mindset and how they think. We tend to apply what we call mirror imaging to Russia. Russia's a rational actor. They're going to do what we think, but not necessarily. Ukraine gives us that unique perspective on what possibly Russia is thinking and doing. Look, the other thing we're seeing with Ukraine is the innovation that they've employed with weapons that have been supplied to them, weapons that have been used in ways that the Western countries never envisioned, but have been extremely effective. And then also they've given us a lot of insights on drone warfare and how it could be fought. But even more important is the way in which their engineers are designing weapon systems to strike deeper into Russia, to 2,000 kilometers deep, to hit refineries, airfields, and key governmental installations. So we do benefit from an intelligence perspective, both on the mindset, but also the capabilities of the Russian forces. And they have exposed many vulnerabilities for the Russian military. And I'll also say, so had the rebels in Syria exposed that exact same thing.
Well, and this seems like even another area that Kyiv and Washington could cooperate in. I'm glad you mentioned that, because we were at the Defense Tech Forum in Kyiv this last week. And of course, we saw some really interesting stuff. General Petraeus was there. He said that it was one of the best such conferences that he's seen. The innovation and the rapid development in a very different way that the U.S. procures its own weapon systems, which I'm sure involves a lot of waste. We see Elon Musk with Dodge. They're wanting to make cuts in the Department of Defense. Now, I'm wondering if there aren't some really good lessons that we can take from a resource-constrained country fighting a major war and apply it to our own procurement procedures in the United States to achieve some of the efficiencies that Elon Musk wants to achieve.
Oh yeah, cutting through the bureaucracy, cutting through the processes that are in place right now for the procurement of weapons. Look, if General Petraeus said it's got to be true, okay, and I don't say that jokingly. I've worked with General Petraeus for the better part of 6 years, both in the 101st Airborne Division and then in other capacities as an intelligence officer. What I would say is again, we have a methodology for procurement which may take 2 to 6 years, but at some point you have to skip steps or reduce steps, compress steps in order to get an output. It may not provide a perfect output, but it provides an output. It's something that you can commit and then make adjustments as those weapon systems are being used in combat environments. You can go back and make adjustments. You don't need perfect. It's always, perfect is the evil of good. Good enough, I think, is some cases in a time compressed manner is the right way of going about it. And I think just by looking at what Zelensky has been able to do, what his engineers have been able to do, and what his military has been able to accomplish with those weapon systems is just amazing. We call it a revolution in military affairs, and he has done that with drone warfare.
Yeah, now a lot of progress has been made on the domestic production front. Ukraine saying it's going to produce about 4.5 million drones this year. They've already produced about 1 million so far, which is way ahead of what they've ever done in the years past, especially last year. Can Ukraine continue fighting on without U.S. support this year to further degrade Russia? We are seeing signs that the Russian economy is faltering. And of course, we know that from past history with the Soviet Union, that The Soviet Union overspent in military affairs and was simply unable to keep up, which led to its collapse. So is this something you think that President Zelensky is definitely considering, to continue the fight based on the own domestic production capabilities and, of course, potentially maybe even European support only?
Yeah, so the short answer for me is yes. And it's yes because they have two capabilities. The first capability are the deep strikes that they're able to do with some of their weapons systems. They're able to go after those oil refineries, the natural gas process facilities, ammunition storage facilities, other installations that are waging war, and other installations that provide the finances to wage war. So they're able to do that with the deep strike capability. And in the close fight, they're able to, with their drones, they're able to hold back Russian forces. Look, I've gone back through, I guess, the past 2 weeks of casualty figures, and in Ukraine, they are effectively killing, again, producing casualties of upwards to 1,100 to 1,200 Russian soldiers a day, and they're doing that primarily with their drone systems, one against armored vehicles and then also against troop formations. So very capable to stay in the fight for the next 6 months or 12 months. What they won't be able to do is the maneuver aspect. They won't be able to counterattack because they don't have the weapons to counterattack, and they're being restrained in their ability to do the interdiction attack, which would stop the flow of Russian forces into the country so they don't have to kill 1,100 Russian soldiers today. They can dispose of them in their assembly areas in Russia. So within the close fight and within the deep fight, the answer is yes. Okay, but they're not going to be able to push Russian forces out unless they can do the interdiction fight.
All right. Well, we'll have to see how these negotiations go, whether they move forward or not. John Sweet, retired U.S. military intelligence officer, thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate your analysis. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thanks, Don. I appreciate it.
And that concludes this edition of Ukraine This Week. Join us again next week for all the latest developments from the war in Ukraine. Thank you for watching, and see you then. Goodbye.